2-year-old child sits alone in a cave in southern France 30,000 years ago, and the world outside is trying to kill her. Ice sheets 2 miles thick crush the northern continents. Temperatures plunge 40 degrees below anything you've experienced. Woolly mammoths the size of school buses stamp through waist-deep snow, their breath freezing mid-air into crystalline clouds. Saber-toothed cats with canines longer than your forearm prowl the edges of firelight. The child's family hasn't returned from the hunt in 3 days. She has 12 hours before hypothermia takes her. This is what survival looked like for 70,000 years. Your ancestors lived through this, not metaphorically. Actually lived, generation after generation, when 99% of species in similar situations went extinct. The last ice age wasn't a single freeze. It was a rolling catastrophe that began 115,000 years ago and didn't fully release its grip until 11,700 years ago. Picture this: Boston buried under ice, thicker than the Empire State Building is tall. Glaciers carving out the Great Lakes like fingernails dragging through clay. Sea levels dropping 400 feet because so much water got locked into ice that entire continental shelves became frozen tundra. Britain and France connected by a land bridge. You could walk from Russia to Alaska without getting your feet wet. Humans didn't just endure this. We thrived in conditions that would kill you in hours without modern gear. The temperature differential alone should have finished us. During glacial maximums, average global temperatures crashed by up to 15 degrees Celsius. 15 degrees separates a comfortable room from a meat freezer. Now scale that across continents for millennia. Wind chills in Ice Age Europe regularly hit 70 below zero. Exposed skin freezes in under 5 minutes at that temperature. Your lungs start to burn with each breath. Your eyelashes stick together. Without fire, you're dead before sunrise. But here's the twist. The cold wasn't even the worst part. The real killer was starvation. When ice sheets advance, ecosystems collapse, forests vanish, grasslands turn to frozen barrens. The megafauna that survived got bigger and more dangerous. Everything became harder to catch, harder to kill, harder to eat. A modern human needs roughly 2,000 calories daily. You, right now, probably get that from 3 predictable meals. Ice Age humans had to extract those calories from an environment actively hostile to calorie production. Hunt a woolly rhinoceros with stone-tipped spears while temperatures hover at 20 below. Miss, and you've burned energy you can't afford to lose. Hit, and you've got 10,000 pounds of meat that'll rot before you can eat it all, unless you solve preservation problems that wouldn't have obvious solutions for millennia. So how did we do it? How did creatures built for African savannas conquer the ice? Fire came first, but not how you think. Humans controlled fire at least 400,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. But controlling fire and weaponizing it for Ice Age survival are different skills entirely. Your ancestors became pyromaniacs out of necessity. They learned to read landscapes for flint deposits. They memorized which rocks sparked when struck together. They identified trees whose bark peeled into perfect tinder even when wet. They discovered that carrying embers wrapped in moss inside a hollowed horn kept flame alive for days during migration. Fire wasn't just warmth. It was a portable sun, a predator deterrent, a cooking technology, and a psychological anchor against the crushing darkness of 18-hour winter nights. The caves you picture when you imagine Ice Age life. Most humans didn't live deep inside them. Too cold, too damp, too dark. Instead, they built structures at cave mouths or out in the open, sophisticated enough to make modern survivalists weep with envy. In 1965, archaeologists excavating a site in what's now Ukraine found something that rewrote the textbooks. Circular dwellings 15 feet across, constructed entirely from mammoth bones, skulls for the base, femurs and ribs interlocked to form arching walls, tusks curved overhead as structural supports for hide roofs. One dwelling used the bones from at least 95 mammoths. Think about the engineering precision required. These weren't random bone piles. They were calculated architecture, designed to shed wind, insulate against cold, and house families through 6-month winters. The bones alone weighed several tons. Moving them without wheels or draft animals meant coordinating group labor with rope, leverage, and ice to slide loads across frozen ground. Inside these bone houses, families burned fires in central hearths lined with stones. The bones themselves provided secondary insulation. Fat deposits in mammoth bone marrow created fuel that burned hot and slow. A single femur could smolder for hours. The structural integrity of these dwellings was sufficient that some sites show evidence of continuous occupation for decades. Clothing technology might have been even more crucial than shelter. You can always retreat to a house. You can't hunt naked. Ice Age humans didn't just wrap themselves in hides, they invented tailoring. Excavations across Europe and Asia have uncovered bone needles so fine you could thread modern thread through their eyes. These needles, some over 30,000 years old, show microscopic wear patterns consistent with stitching tight seams. Why does that matter? Because loose hides draped over your body create convection currents. Cold air circulates against your skin. You lose heat faster than you generate it. But fitted clothing with sealed seams traps a boundary layer of warm air. Add layering, and you've essentially invented the parka. Analysis of Ice Age bone needles suggests they punched through leather up to 15,000 times before breaking. That's hundreds of garments per needle. Researchers have found bone buttons, bone toggles, even evidence of drawstrings at ankle and wrist closures. Your ancestors knew that heat escapes through gaps. They knew that wet clothing kills faster than no clothing. They developed water-resistant outer layers from animal intestines and fish skin. They stuffed boots with dried grass that wicked moisture and insulated simultaneously. They wore furred mittens that allowed enough dexterity to hold spears but prevented frostbite. Then there's the food problem, which required solutions bordering on genius. Hunting megafauna wasn't optional. It was the only viable calorie strategy. Plant foods mostly disappeared under snow for 8 months yearly. Small game went into hibernation or migrated. That left the giants: mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant elk with antler spans 12 feet across, cave bears that weighed 1,500 pounds. Hunting these animals with Paleolithic technology should have been impossible. But humans didn't hunt fair. We hunted smart, and we hunted dirty. At a site in Poland, researchers found the remains of 100 mammoths at the base of a cliff. Impact fractures on the bones. These animals didn't fall accidentally. They were driven off intentionally, a coordinated effort requiring detailed landscape knowledge, group communication, and ice-cold timing. Elsewhere, excavations revealed elaborate pit traps camouflaged with branches and snow, deep enough that a mammoth couldn't escape once it fell through. Other sites show evidence of fire drives, intentionally set blazes that panicked herds into killing zones. The Neanderthals, who survived in Europe until about 40,000 years ago, took it further. Analysis of Neanderthal skeletons shows injury patterns identical to modern rodeo riders: broken ribs, compression fractures, torn shoulder joints. These people closed to contact range with multi-ton animals, probably because projectile technology wasn't yet precise enough. They thrust spears into mammoth flanks from arm's length. The bones tell the story. They got trampled, gored, and crushed regularly. Yet they survived these injuries, which means other members of their groups cared for them through months of recovery. You can't nurse a broken pelvis alone in the Ice Age. Survival demanded community. Food preservation became an art form. Your ancestors discovered that meat buried in permafrost stayed edible indefinitely. They dug ice cellars that functioned as natural freezers. They learned to slice meat paper thin and freeze-dry it in sub-zero wind, creating something remarkably similar to modern jerky. They rendered fat into dense calorie blocks that wouldn't spoil. They cracked bones and extracted marrow, which provided essential fatty acids that prevented starvation even when muscle meat was available. They ate everything: organs, eyes, brain tissue, connective tissue, bone marrow, blood. Waste wasn't a concept. they could afford. Migration patterns show sophisticated environmental tracking. Ice Age groups followed herds across hundreds of miles, timing movements to intercept migrations at river crossings and valley choke points. They memorized seasonal variations across vast territories. They knew which valleys held game during which months, which ridgelines caught less snow, which south-facing slopes thawed earliest in spring. This wasn't wandering. It was precision navigation across trackless tundra passed down through oral tradition with accuracy that rivaled GPS. Tool innovation accelerated under Ice Age pressure. The hand axes that dominated earlier eras gave way to specialized implements: scrapers for hide processing, burins for engraving bone and antler, microblades that could be hafted into composite tools, atlatls, spear throwers that doubled projectile range and tripled impact force. Each innovation represented thousands of hours of experimental failure, refined across generations into optimized designs. A well-made Solitrean laurel leaf point from 20,000 years ago shows flaking so precise that modern flint knappers can't reliably replicate it. But tools and tactics only explain part of the survival equation. The psychological component might have been most critical. Imagine the mental load: 18-hour nights in screaming wind, months between successful hunts, children dying from infections that modern antibiotics cure in days, frostbite claiming fingers and toes, the constant grinding awareness that a twisted ankle miles from camp means death. Depression would have been endemic, despair rational. Yet your ancestors didn't just survive, they created. Cave paintings dating to Ice Age Europe show artistic sophistication that staggers modern viewers. The Chauvet Cave in France contains images 36,000 years old, horses rendered with shading and perspective, lions captured mid-prowl with anatomical precision, charging rhinos that seem to explode off the stone. These weren't crude stick figures. They were masterworks requiring advanced cognitive abilities, symbolic thinking, and cultural transmission of technique. People freezing in mammoth bone huts, perpetually hungry, still made time for art. Why? Because art does something practical. It binds communities. Shared creation generates shared identity. Ritual and symbol give meaning to suffering. The act of painting a bison on a cave wall connects you to ancestors who painted the same wall a generation before, and to descendants who'll add their own images generations hence. Culture became a survival technology, as vital as fire. Musical instruments appear in the archaeological record. Bone flutes carved from vulture wing bones, still playable after 40,000 years. Someone sat in the dark, in the cold, and made music. Someone else listened. That matters. That's the difference between a species that endures and one that gives up. Social structures evolved under Ice Age pressure. Evidence suggests bands of 20 to 30 individuals who periodically gathered with other bands for mate exchange, information sharing, and resource trading. These gatherings created networks spanning hundreds of miles. Knowledge about distant food sources, tool innovations, and territorial threats flowed through social channels. If one band's territory got hit by catastrophic cold, they could relocate to allied territories because relationships had been maintained through regular contact. Isolation meant death. Connection meant options. Children born into Ice Age bands entered brutal training from toddlerhood. By age 5, they tracked animals, identified edible plants under snow, and maintained fires. By 10, they participated in hunts. By 15, they possessed survival skills. Modern Special Forces operators spend years learning. There was no childhood in our sense. There was preparation for the only life available. And yet, despite everything, the population bottlenecked. Genetic analysis reveals that roughly 70,000 years ago, humanity crashed to perhaps 10,000 individuals globally. We nearly went extinct. The Toba supervolcano eruption in Indonesia may have triggered a volcanic winter that compounded Ice Age conditions. Skies darkened with ash. Temperatures plunged further. Food chains collapsed. Most humans died, but not all. The survivors, your direct ancestors, possessed some combination of luck, location, and adaptability that carried them through. Every human alive today descends from that tiny remnant population. We are, all of us, the children of the stubborn few who refuse to freeze. The Ice Age ended not with a bang, but with a thaw spanning millennia. As temperatures rose and ice retreated, humans followed the changing landscapes. Forests returned, agriculture became possible. Civilization emerged from the survival strategies refined during 70,000 years of ice. That child in the French cave waiting in the dark? She survived because someone came back for her. Someone always came back. For 70,000 years, across every frozen continent, in the face of extinction-level cold, humans chose each other. We huddled together in mammoth bone houses while predators circled outside. We shared the last scraps of meat when sharing meant survival. We carried the injured when abandonment would have been easier. We painted bison on cave walls because tomorrow mattered, even when tomorrow looked like death. You're here because they didn't quit when quitting made perfect sense. Remember that the next time anything feels hard,